As you can see, I am dressed in all black because this episode was a funeral. I am Bobby. Welcome to Culture Kitsch. Just a little bit of housekeeping. As you can see, this episode is going up on a Tuesday, but next week's episode will be back on our usual posting schedule of Mondays. So thank you all for being super troopers about that with me. Season 2, episode 7 of Interview with a Vampire, entitled I Could Not Prevent It. We will get there. But this is an episode that I only took 2 pages of notes on. Just for reference, I usually average around like 4 or 5 pages worth of notes like per episode. So I don't know how much I will have to say, but it's not because the episode didn't give me much. It's because the episode was really something that you kind of have to see to believe. It is just far and away a phenomenal piece of television, and truly is up there with the greats of television, as was predicted by many of the critics who have already seen episode 7 and 8. So they've seen the finale and they know how it all wraps up. But this episode in particular, phenomenal piece of work. But let's just get into it. So the episode opens and we are now at the recounting of the trial and the ensuing incidents before and after. And it opens with Louis beginning to give his recollection of the abduction of him, Claudia, and Madeline, and Daniel trying to do the thing that he's been doing in the last 2 episodes, where like since the events of episode 5, they're kind of, him and Daniel, Louis and Daniel, are in cahoots. They've forged a bit of an alliance against Armand. This episode, Louis is not having it. This is not a time for the situation between him, Daniel, and Armand. This is all about the situation between him, Claudia, and Lestat. So we're jumping from one, trio to another. Like I said in a previous video, the show operates on the rule of 3s. Like everything happens in 3s. There is a kind of triangle foundation that this show rests upon. And this episode was, proof positive of that. So the Théâtre des Vampires, who I previously loved and now will eternally hate, even my favorites, Sam, Egley, I love you, or I loved you, but you wronged me, and you wronged my family. So in turn, I will hate you forever. That's just kind of how that goes. So all of them in the troupe get together and they abduct Louis, Claudia, and Madeline, as we see, and they have tortured them. They put Claudia in the rat box, which is just a cruel irony of what she was doing, giving it her all, being a good coven member, serving the coven as best as she could before everything transpired, and they throw her in the rat box before they publicly humiliate her, which is just terrible. They nail them down, or they are basically treated as props. Like Daniel's just like, oh, like you were, actors in a play, and Louis is like, no, we were props. Like they weren't even really treated as, I was about to say human, they weren't treated as beings with, autonomy and sentience, or just they weren't treated with respect is the main thing. They weren't treated with any semblance of respect, and it's just proof positive in how they treat them. Like I think slash their ankle tendon so they can't run. They have tortured them and maimed them. Like they're just all just completely out of it. And so then the trial really picks up from where it dropped off in the last episode. And it commences with Santiago reading Claudia's diaries. And they have them all displayed there like it's like a jewelry rack at a department store. They're all laid out. They've stolen everything. And Santiago is like reading Claudia's diaries for everyone to hear. And mocking her too. Mocking her voice, mocking her accent. Like there are a lot of racist undertones that are happening underneath this trial, which is not really a trial. As Claudia says later on in the episode, it's a stoning. It's just a form of public humiliation. And it is able to operate on a lot of different levels, but there's definitely an anti-black current underneath the surface of this entire trial, and we'll get into it. So after Santiago reads Claudia's diaries, who comes out fresh Brazilian blowout and roller set and all? Blondie, aka Lestat Le Lioncourt. This is the first time that we are seeing him in full, in the flesh. We saw him in last week's episode technically too, but this is him. This is an extended look at Lestat. As you may well recall, the entirety of the season we have gotten Dreamstat, which is a conjuring of Louise's mind, hallucination essentially, and this is now we are getting real deal Holyfield Lestat in the flesh, not dead. So he seems fine. Yeah, it was his attempted murder, but like he seems fine to me, just saying. So he comes out, and off rip, we already know this is a play. This is a play. He comes back. He does a little bit of vamping, so to speak, for lack of a better term. And he's just like, oh, I like the old place. And like Santiago's asking like, oh, like, what are you doing here in Paris? And clearly they're following a script. And just so you know, from here on out, since the moment Lestat walked on that stage, he has been going like off script. Just off script. And the thing is, it's not just like following the script and that's it. Like they have it timed. Like it's a real deal play, like a Théâtre des Vampires play, where they have like timed projections that are depicting whatever it is happening in the play at that time. He does his little introduction. Fun fact, Lestat and I share the same birthday. We are both November 7th Scorpios. So yay. I also liked during this scene when Santiago's asking like, oh, like, what are you doing here in Paris or something to that effect. He's like rattles off very quickly like, oh, I have a box at a men's doubles match, and he and he says, I'm going to drain the Australians if they win, which is just a cheeky little nod to Lestat's actor Sam Reed, who is Australian. So it's just a fun little tiny little detail that's just like a fun little thing. So they get started with going into the general layout of like things from Lestat's point of view. And before they can really even get into it, Santiago says like this story of butchery and blah, 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 blah. He's going into really vilifying Louis, and Lestat says, no, this is not a story of butchery, this is a story of love. Like from Lestat's perspective, you can really understand that he sees this as a story of love. He sees it as a story of fraught at many times love. So that's the basis that he's operating from, not me, him. And you can see that this is making Santiago get upset, and for the rest of the play pretty much he is going like Santiago and Lestat are just kind of going like nice, nasty tit for tat. Like Lestat will do something like he'll go off script and Santiago will just be like, okay, like, or like, this is your cue. Like, why aren't you getting this? Like, he is just acting with Lestat is acting kind of, I wouldn't say fully reckless abandon, but he's doing the Lestat thing. He's doing what he wants to do, as he almost always does. So we start with Lestat's kind of origin. We saw it earlier in the season with episode 4. Was that episode 4? Episode 3 or episode 4, where we see Nikki, who is Lestat's first lover, former lover, and he talks about how after Nikki's death, which Armand had a hand in, and so that's when we get the reveal that Armand is sitting in basically a box seat right up close and personal to the events that are happening on stage. And this is when they try to make it seem like Armand is just being tortured by what's taking place on the stage. But you have to remember also, in the events of last episode, Armand sold them out. He sold out Louis, Madeline, and Claudia to protect himself. And he's like being held in a box against his will by Sam, who's holding a Spirit Halloween like Grim Reaper scepter to keep him in place, allegedly. Now, if you expect me to believe that 500-year-old plus vampire, the vampire Armand, who has the ability to stop space and time and can conjure fire from nothing, you think he's being kept in a box by a much younger playwright slash stagehand in Sam with a little scepter to stop him? You think I believe that? You got another thing coming, babes, because I don't believe it. He's got an up close and personal seat to the consequences of his actions. And what does he do with that? We find out a little bit later on. And spoiler alert, it will piss you off as it pissed me off. So let's keep going. But Lestat says that Armand kind of had a hand in Nikki's death, and ultimately Nikki's death spiraled Lestat to where he slept for like 100 years. And when he awoke, he made pilgrimage to New Orleans and came to the United States, where he meets one Louis de Pont du Lac. And one last thing, Louis immediately, just off of the little piddly ass apology he received from Armand for Armand revealing that he asked Armand to wipe his memories of him going into the sun, now he's back to protecting Armand in his very Louis way. Of him saying, like, you know, like, basically with his whole being kept, you know, captive, because Louis says, like, he was kept captive just like we were. Babe, it's a little bit different, I think. It's just a little bit different, because we can see later on that Armand is able to do things from that box. It's not like it's like a mind power binding, but like they don't bind and capture and keep captive Armand in the same way that they do Louis, Madeline, and Claudia. Like, not by a long shot. It's an open air box, you know? But it just is so interesting to me, because Louis is just like, well, he spent the entire time, like, Daniel's just like, you had a up close and personal look at the way that you betrayed these people. And Louis was just like, well, the entire time, like, he has to take accountability, but the entire time he was in his timeout box, he was thinking of ways to save me. Girl, all right. So Lestat kind of keeps on talking, and at this point, give that man a headset, because this is a TED Talk. This is not a trial. This is a TED Talk. And while Lestat is beginning to talk about how he, you know, made pilgrimage to the United States and all these things, he begins to turn around and he sees Louis. And I think this is when Santiago says, like he makes like reference to Louis in some way, and he is basically like saying, like, point out who the accused is. And Lestat kind of turns back and locks eyes with Louis for the first time, because this whole time Lestat has been kind of preening to the crowd. He's been looking at Santiago. He really hasn't looked behind him at Claudia, or more importantly to him, Lestat or Louis. So they lock eyes, and it's from then on that things begin to not derail, because they do reach a tragic conclusion, but they begin to peter a little bit, like with Lestat, because they have that moment where they're just like, you understand this weird, complex, dark, twisted, and nasty type of love that they share between one another. You know, like, it's just, it transcends what we understand about human love, which is already incredibly complex and messy and all those things. And it's just all of these different layers of nuance and complexities and things like that, that you would think one guy who was literally on stage and came back so that he could punish his lover and their daughter and sentence them to death, he sees his lover and he's just like, but I still love you though. I still love you. And Louis is kind of looking a little bit the same. Like he's, I think, terrified of Lestat and being there and the awkwardness of it all. But like also, he's kind of looking at him with a little bit of sweetness too. Like he does like a little bit of like polite, like the smile you get when you see an ex on the street that you haven't seen in a couple of years. That things ended like a little bit messily, but they were still incredibly passionate. That's the vibe that they have in this current moment. It's crazy. It's crazy given all the layers of it, everything around.
This is in different areas. What the?
So much. And it's so much that's all like localized in one look, you know? So Lestat continues on, and at a certain point, he begins to recount how he and Louis met. And he flips it and says that Louis was the one who pursued him. Louis was the one who was stalking him. Louis was the one. And like we know, and we even see it in the like recap at the beginning of the episode. They show episodes from season 1 where Louis literally says, I was being hunted and I had no awareness of it. I had no idea of it. And now Lestat is presenting himself as the helpless damsel in distress being pursued by the scary man. And this is where some of the like kind of anti-black sentiments can be bubbled up. You know, I'd like to think it was very purposeful by the writers to have Lestat kind of come in and pretend to be the damsel when he was very much so the aggressor, you know, like flipping it when he's in the position of authority or is pleading to authority that, oh, it wasn't, you know, I'm just a helpless vampire, but this man who just happens to be black was the one who was pursuing me and stalking me and all those things. Like these are the like subtextual bits of the story that only further to perpetuate just how like effed up this trial is. Like it's not a trial at all. It's a sham. And when he's doing that, Louis tries to yell out and be like, he did all those things to me. Because at one point, Lestat says, Louis said, come to me, come to me. Now, mind you, Lestat wrote a whole damn song called Come to Me. So who was doing that? Who was coming to who? You know what I mean? And the whole time that Lestat is talking about this, Louis is like, what? Like, no, like he's just like, that's wrong. Like he's lying on me. And Louis tries to say as much, but all of the members of the coven are able to do this like mind paralyzation thing where it kind of disorients their thoughts and that they can't really get words out. So that like stops them from talking and speaking out and testifying against Lestat. Like they've kind of built in, they've silenced them for this entire trial, which again, this is not a trial. We get to the point where we are talking about Louis, the night that Louis was turned. And they're saying that, you know, Louis accepted the dark gift and he embraced Lestat. And Lestat was like, I offered him the dark gift at an altar in a church. And this is how you're seeing the differences between how Louis sees the night of his turning and how Lestat sees the night of his turning. And I think it was in an article from TV Insider that was written by one of my mutuals, Kelly. TV Insider and TV Guide have been doing amazing coverage of the show all season. So I highly recommend that you go and check out some of their articles, especially from Kelly. I'll link some in the description box down below. But from this week's article where Kelly got a chance to talk to Jacob Anderson, Delaney Hales, Sam Reed, and I think Roxanne Duran, Jacob Anderson says that to Lestat, like this was a wedding. Like the night that he was turned was a wedding, but to Louis, it was, you know, the night of his death and the night of his birth. Like there was they're kind of in two, not, I wouldn't even say they're opposing groups. I wouldn't say they're opposing at all, but their viewpoint of what the central focus of the night was different. For Louis, it was becoming a vampire. For Lestat, this was their marriage. Like he proposed the dark gift and eternal life and eternal companionship in a church at an altar. So he's like, we're married now. Like this that was a marriage. We are married. So throughout all of that, then this one army man shouts out the F slur, a homophobic slur, and Lestat like teleports to him and it's just like basically telling him about himself. He was just like, you're a soldier, but you never fired a rifle once during the war. In fact, you threw up many times in your foxhole and you ran away many times. You're a coward. You're a punk bitch. You know, like that's the vibe that Lestat is giving to him. He's just basically like, hey, so don't act like a barnyard animal, and perhaps we shush when I'm talking, okay? Because I just told you everything about yourself, about how, oh, you're a soldier and no one wants to see that, blah, 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 blah. No one wants to see two, gay vampires. First of all, to that man, do you know where you are? You came to the Théâtre des Vampires and didn't expect to see a little bit of gay? Okay, yeah. Weird. And then two, when Lestat is up there, he's just like, you will not be speaking when I'm speaking. So zip those lips, because I will kill you in front of everyone here. And he didn't do it, but I'm sure he thought about it. This just shows that, like, Lestat exercises reverence and love in the weirdest times and in the weirdest ways, because he's talking about the night of his wedding, like he's the blushing bride, and then this guy yells like a homophobic slur, and he's just like, I'm talking about my wedding right now, so shut up, please. I can't even call him inconsistencies. Lestat is just a weird guy, but in that moment he did what he had to do. So Lestat talks about when Louis was turned and how he didn't really embrace vampirism, and he refuses to really feed on humans. He only feeds on animals. And the crazy thing is, during all of this, the audience is laughing at Louis for being a vampire that doesn't want to kill humans. Now, mind you, this audience is comprised of like all humans, and they're just like, ha ha ha, Louis is a vampire, doesn't want to feed on humans, ha 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 ha. I'm like, girl, what do you think is going on here? What do you think's happening here? Legitimately. Like, again, and I think it's the thing that the Théâtre des Vampires has always been able to operate off of, is showing someone in plain day, like broad daylight, what's going on, and them just being like, oh, haha, it's a farce, it's not real. It very much so is real. Very much so. So now we get to the night that Claudia was turned, and this is where things take a turn for the interesting and also the worst. So with Claudia's turning, the original story is that there's a fire. Louis hears Claudia, saves her, and asks Lestat to turn her. And it's kind of a little bit of a simple process. Like, they have a little bit of a back and forth, but it's not really anything too extraneous from either side. Like, Louis says, please turn her, and Lestat is just like, no. Like, he's kind of just like, we don't know her, like, it's fine, like, this is not your battle to fight. And Louis is just like, please turn her. And so Lestat eventually, like, he does it. In this version, in the version that Lestat accounts, and Louis in present day is describing how during the trial his body was able to be in two places at once. So he was at the trial, but it felt like Lestat was showing him, I guess, Lestat's recollection of things. And the turning of Claudia involved Lestat actually saying that it's forbidden to turn a child into a vampire, and Lestat laying out in vivid detail how much Claudia would struggle. Her brain and her soul would continue to develop, but her body wouldn't, and that would place a very heavy toll on her. She would be experiencing a deep sense of loneliness. And before this, Lestat explains that vampire loneliness reaches depths that human loneliness don't even begin to touch. And he then goes to a member of the audience and he's just like, take my hand. And like through his hand, the audience member is able to experience loneliness. And that's what Lestat said that he felt during this time. He was feeling this great sense of loneliness. Now, if I'm recalling correctly, at some point in this, Lestat begins to entertain Antoinette and like entertain other people. So he's acting like he was just always been this like super faithful and waiting at home picking lint off the couch like Armand was, when Lestat was for the streets and has always well and truly been for the streets. But he didn't have the love from Louis that he so desperately wanted, and in turn he felt like he had to, I don't really know what he felt like he had to do, but him doing this for Louis in season 1 terms, he thought that this would, I guess, bring them closer together. She's always going to be treated as she's seen here. Like, she's always going to be treated like a teenager, and that's going to destroy her. He told him all of the risks of turning Claudia, and Louis was just like, I don't care. And he's like begging on his hands and knees, and he's just like, I won't leave you if you turn her. I won't leave you. I won't leave you. Please do this for me. Please do this for me. Despite what Lestat was saying. And then Lestat says, like, you'll regret this for the rest of your life. And as we've seen through how Louis has been, treating her and things like that throughout the season, yeah, he had regretted it, I think. So in that, Louis then tells Daniel, like, I'm sorry for maybe not being able to be as honest as I should have been about how I recalled Claudia's turning and kind of how it was an act of selfishness. But I've seen a lot of people talk about it. I don't know if this scene tells us something that we didn't already kind of know about how Louis saw Claudia's turning. And Lestat says, like, he's just like, oh, what is she going to be, like a lap dog? And he's like, no, not a dog. But ultimately, that's kind of what it began to turn into. Like, she was an accessory. She was a throw pillow. Like, a throw pillow. Things that are not super important is sometimes how Louis treated Claudia. Doesn't mean that he didn't love her. Very obviously he did. But in his actions towards her, sometimes it was a little bit different and inconsistent. And the fact that he knew that this is what her life would be, and he was just like, do it anyways, it's messed up. Louis is a little messed up, like, I think he tried to love her and does love her as best as he could, but then when it reached a point where he wasn't in the same headspace as he was when he was begging for her to be turned, then that's when you get that little bit of contention and gray area with a character like Louis. Very, very interesting scene. And going back and looking at other scenes, knowing that Louis knew this would be Claudia's fate and that it was forbidden and things like that is interesting. But at the end of it, Lestat says, like, hey, I turned Claudia, so whatever happens to them should also happen to me. And Santiago immediately steps in and is just like, well, but you were manipulated, though. Like, you were manipulated into turning her and to doing all this. And, like, every single time Lestat tries to take a little bit of accountability, which is not often, so let's clap it up for that, he is stopped by Santiago trying to continue to vilify Claudia and Louis. After they kind of settle that, and Louis says, and once Lestat kind of, says his side or his recollection of Claudia's turning, Louis denies it on the stage. But in present day, like you said, like, he doesn't deny it. He knew it was the truth. And once it's all said and done, Claudia then asked Louis on stage during the trial, like, it's all lies, right? And Louis said, yeah, it's all lies. And the look that she gives him is like, I don't believe you. I don't think that's a lie. I think you knew and you did it anyway. And now I'm angry. And from then on, Claudia is rageful, rightly so, just full of complete and utter rage and anger. Because imagine finding out that you didn't have to suffer in the way that you did. And the person who, was there, who it made it seem like it was something different, not like you've been living a lie or you've been told a lie. And there's nothing you can really do about it. That's kind of where Claudia's at right now. It's just, I can't imagine how disorienting that is. And so I think she just takes it for what it is. I think she knows that Louis in that moment may be lying to her. And now she's internally like, oh, I'm upset. I'm pissed. I'm angry. Then we get to the depression that Louis falls into when Claudia leaves for the first time. And it's like 7 years. And Lestat is talking about how he was just incredibly lonely. Louis didn't want to touch him. He was just full of vitriol and hate and all of these things. And he is just like, in that moment, what do? Do you go and look for a new lover and find companionship somewhere else? And the whole audience is just like, yes, yes, yes. And then we get into Antoinette. Now, they really want me to care about the death of Antoinette. And let me tell you something, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen, okay? It was self-defense, first of all. In a court of law, that was self-defense, what Claudia did to Antoinette. And so from that whole thing, now we get into the events of episode 5. And I'm not really going to go too much into this part because we kind of know what it is. If you've seen episode 5, you know what it is. I'm not really going to recount the scenes all that much. But you just get to the main point of this section is that Lestat, when he uses his cloud gift and the scene where he takes Louis up to the clouds and drops him. I remember when that episode came out and everyone was just like, oh, he didn't really fall, that didn't really happen, like just making up excuses after excuses after excuses. And this episode, Lestat comes clean. They try to make it seem like the Théâtre des Vampires, mainly Santiago, are like, yeah, he dropped Louis from 2 kilometers, and then all the humans are like, oh my God. And Santiago's like, to y'all, that sounds like a lot, but to us, it's not really that bad. And he was fine, and it's all good, and it's not that bad. Like, Lestat was capable of punching a priest through the head, but he didn't do that to Louis. So obviously his abuse wasn't that bad. But throughout this whole thing, it feels like Lestat is like detonating with the revelation of what he had done to Louis. Whether it was out of character or not, it was in character because he did it, okay? I'm not about to argue with, well, book Lestat. I don't care. In the show, he did it. And in this episode, he apologizes. And it's just saying, like, I wanted to hurt you. I dropped you from there because I wanted you to hurt. He was a broken thing, and I knew he was broken because I broke him. This is Lestat bearing it all out on the line and not hiding from anything, which is admirable because I really didn't think it was going to go that way with him. I'm not going to lie to you. But he says, like, I did it on purpose. I wanted to hurt him, and I did. And then he gets into and I'm sorry and everything like that. And, it doesn't take much with Louis. One of his partners gives a somewhat heartfelt apology, and now he's just like, oh, it's okay. The whole time they're trying to downplay this whole domestic violence situation into simply a lover's quarrel. Like, oh, because Santiago's like, when you're vampires, this type of stuff is, pretty common, and we're 2 strong beings. Like, these types of things are not really seen as abuse to us. They're just little spats, like little lovers' quarrels. It's not really that big of a deal. But there's a point where there's obviously like a cue for Lestat to speak more, and he says under his breath, a wolf congratulated for not killing her pups. He's a maker who was congratulated for not killing his fledglings when he did things to him. I think he's feeling the ramifications of that, where the trial is congratulating him and awarding him for not maiming and killing his fledgling when it should have never gotten to that. It should have never gotten that far. And he's like, you can feel him kind of like detonating a little bit. Like he's having a hard time with that revelation. And then that's when Louis kind of gets into how, like, not the inconsistencies, but just the weirdness of a guy like Lestat. He crossed the ocean because he wanted to see Louis and Claudia dead. But then when he gets here, he gives this sincere apology for ever doing what he did to Louis, Because he says, I would always be sorry for what I did to you. And he's crying and he's looking back at Louis and they're having this moment. And in that moment, Claudia says, if it's true, it's too late. It's way too late for you to just be feeling all this remorse when we're about to die. Like, a little bit too late for that. But in present day, Louis says, that's what Lestat does. He will, that's the inconsistencies of a guy like him. He is full of all this rage and anger, and then when you think he's going to be at his most rageful and anger filled, then he's super loving and honest and earnest. If you never really know where he is, you can never really know how to try to treat him. And so the ball is really in his court a lot of the times when it comes to that type of behavior. And it's just all types of inconsistent. And then this is when Claudia is like, oh, I've had it officially. I've had it officially with everybody up here. She says he drops Louis on purpose like an egg from an airplane with the intent to hurt / him. We poisoned him. We're getting the nth degree right now. It's crazy that this show is showing the epitome of white tears via Lestat. Just as much as it is so very noble and admirable and all of the ables that Lestat was able to take accountability for the abuse he enacted on Louis and Claudia, he admitted to trying to kill Louis. Is that not the attempted murder of one Louis Dupont du Lac that would put Lestat on trial as well? And to be fair to Lestat, he has made some allusions that, whatever happens to them should happen to me too. I made Claudia. I broke a rule. What happens to them happens to me. And Santiago was like, no. You were coerced into doing that. You were coerced. You're messing up the play. And with this, he admits to trying to kill Louis or trying to hurt him at the very least. He should be given the same treatment that they're being given. Lestat could get up there, have those people eating out of the palm of his hands, and admit to multiple broken vampire rules, and nothing happens to him. And yet, they did the same thing. He didn't die, and they're the ones on trial. It's unfair. And this is another, like I said, they kind of employ the idea of white tears. Lestat did a horrible thing, a terrible thing. And yeah, he took accountability for it and cried. But then now everyone's just like, oh, but he feels so bad for it. So obviously he's redeemed. Versus Claudia and Louis, who are up there being tortured and maimed. And that same treatment is not given. What gives? And she says, can I cry and say that I'm sorry too? Will that be enough? And being a Black woman watching this show, that is, words cannot describe how universal of an experience that is for so many Black women. Of can I cry and enact the same action and change and all those things as my white counterparts? Most likely not. Claudia is doing it in the same way of y'all let this murderer and abuser up on stage and he expresses a little bit of remorse and cries and he's fine. But us, no, we get the book thrown at us. And at this moment, she gets up. Now remember, their ankles are basically the tendons have been ripped in their ankles so they can barely walk. It's so that they can't go anywhere. And Claudia conjures the strength to get up, and she's yelling at both of them, and she's just this trial is just another edition of your little lovers whatever. It was never about me. I was just a shingle in the roof of this house that's blown away. Y'all never cared about me. You never put me first. I think she's getting more and more upset because she's I know I'm going to die and he's going to live. And this was all for naught. It was never about me. Ever. Whether it was with Lestat, whether it's with Armand, it didn't matter. I was treated as expendable. And that's what hurts the most, I think, when it comes to the Ballad of Claudia. She was treated as this expendable being who had to be the end all be all to this one character who begged, knowing that she would live a hard existence, knowing that the audience has been explained to what the depths of vampire loneliness are. And I'm sure Lestat felt it to a certain degree, but the person who felt vampire loneliness the most is Claudia. And she's the one up on trial, meant to just get up and get over it. Like, it's just one of those things where it's just the inconsistencies in the treatment that only further contribute to everything that she had thrown at her. And yes, Louis had stuff thrown at him too. I'm not saying that he just lived this, gumdrops and roses life. But I'm talking about Claudia right now. Let's say, focus, pay attention. Her life and the things that happened in it are much different from the things that Louis is experiencing. Because again, like I've said in previous videos, Louis is going through a lot at all times. But he's never fully had to always do it alone. He's had companionship of some kind. Not to diminish the harm that has happened in those companionships. But the idea of companionship he's never really had to worry about. The loneliness that they were talking about, Claudia has had to feel. And it wasn't until recently when she was able to find a situation where she could have a companion that she didn't feel that anymore. But otherwise, that's been her whole life. And knowing what we know now explicitly, that Louis asked for her to be turned, Louis and Lestat turned her, knowing this existence, knowing what would happen, and they did it anyways, just shows how she's always been treated, as expendable. And it's tragic. It really is. Then in her continued, angered speech and rant, Madeline is kind of like going in and out of it. And she's just like, is this a trial? And Claudia's like, this is not a trial. It's stoning. And when Louis is recounting it to Daniel, he's just like, and the wind kind of left the room when she said that. Because for the first time, I think the humans finally were beginning to click of what is happening. This is not a fun little kangaroo court trial. This is a stoning. This is a public execution. And they're all witness and they're all complicit, which is what Santiago always says at the beginning of the Théâtre des Vampires. But now it feels realer. And Louise says things weren't so fun anymore after that, when she said it's a stoning. So then we get to the sentencing. We knew this was coming. They weren't going to have any real legitimate, hearing of defense and all these different things. That wasn't going to happen in this. But the first person up to be sentenced is Madeline. And Santiago and in turn the coven give her a choice. They say, since you're a new vampire and you couldn't have known these things, we're allowing you to be a part of our coven if you will renounce Claudia and Louis, mainly Claudia. And it's funny, the only white girl up there gets a chance to live with the rest of them. But anyways, they're like, if you renounce her, you can join us and you can live. And Madeline, without really any hesitation, she just says, Claudia is my coven. Claudia is my eternal companion. She's who I want to be with. She is my coven. And she says, basically, no, I'm not going to renounce her. I'm with her until the very end. And so then Santiago goes like, then is she guilty or not guilty? She's guilty and she should be sentenced to death. And then we get to Claudia. And he does the whole guilty, not guilty, sentenced to death thing. And she's like, I have one request. And Santiago's like, no, we won't honor it. And Lestat says, no, honor her request. Father of the year over here. Better late than never, I guess. The request is that she wanted the guy in the balcony to take off his hat. And then she says, I've now memorized all your faces. And in the afterlife, if there is one, I'm going to come back and kill all of y'all. And if there's not, I'm going to find a way. And she was dead ass serious about it. Dead serious. She was not, knowing Claudia, knowing the type of vampire she is, she was not kidding. She's coming. She's going to haunt every single one of them. Every single one of them haunted by her. And that's when every human is just like, oh, I thought this was just a show. I didn't realize we were being serious. Is she serious? She's dead serious. Now y'all about to be haunted for the rest of your days. And then the rest of your eternal life days too. So, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Now you're haunted. We finally get to Louis. And they're doing the whole thing of like, guilty, not guilty. And then the sentence is, and we're expecting to hear death like we did with Claudia and Madeline. And then we see the audience kind of struggling to speak, struggling to say anything. And then we see Armand, who is willing the audience to say the word banishment rather than death. At this moment, I was like, so you couldn't do that 2 people ago? You couldn't force the crowd to say banishment for each one? That's what I'm saying. Like, the whole idea of like, oh, he was kept captive. No, the hell he was not. Because if he was really kept captive and Sam was supposed to be this reinforcer like he said that he was with the Spirit Halloween Grim Reaper scepter, he would have just chopped his head off. He was able to do something the entire time. And this is when we get to the name of the episode, which is like, I could not prevent it. Because Daniel calls him out. It's just like, so you saved Louis by saying banishment. By making the crowd say banishment, and not Claudia. And he was just like, I couldn't prevent it. My hands were tied. The typical Armand stuff. I literally wrote down, Armand finally does something now. You're killing me. You're killing me. He made it to Louis, and that's when he was just like, I used all of my energy to make them say banishment. And Santiago in that moment gets upset when the crowd says banishment. He's like, that's not applicable. That's not an option. But then, ever the showman, he has to remember, oh, okay, but the show must go on. So sure, banishment. We'll send him to Belgium. And really what he meant by that is then the coven capture Louis, put him in a coffin with a bunch of rocks, and they're basically going to let him starve to death in the crates that are in the rat box room where former damned members are lying. He's going to meet that same fate, while Claudia and Madeline are sentenced to their very public death. And they then they separate Louis and Claudia. And in that article that I was talking about from TV Insider, they being Louis and Claudia are like grappling at each other when they're separated and screaming, because I think I can't remember who specifically said it, but there was whoever said that I think it was Jacob Anderson, who was just like, this can't be the way that things end with us. Like, that was the moment when they were pulling Louis away, knowing that Claudia was going to die. That's the moment when Louis gets kind of overwhelmed with this guilt of like, oh, the ways in which I've treated her is not right. All of I don't have an opportunity to make it right anymore. We've run out of time. It can't end like this. And it does end like that. And that's what contributes to the tragedy of this whole thing, this whole ordeal. Like, these very, upsy downsy, spins aroundsy looks of this very nuanced type of love that we see between like Louis and Lestat and Louis and Claudia, where there's just all these layers, all of these, the depths and the layers of their relationships and their dynamics. And, on one hand, you have Claudia and Louis being at odds and, not liking each other sometimes. But then when it comes to this incredibly heart-wrenching moment where they are being separated, and now they'll be forever separated by death, and they both realize like, oh, we've run out of time. It can't end like this. that's tragic. Like all of those different, just like, it's like juggling. Like all of these different things are just hanging up in the air. And the episode is asking you to sit with so much that is so heavy and just so brilliant at the same time. It just, oh God, it really got me. So they take Louis to the coffin and put him in the hatch where he's meant to starve to death. And so Daniel's kind of asking, you know, what happens if Claudia? And Louis like, I don't know. I wasn't there. You have to ask him. Armand. So he has Armand, who he will never forgive for what happened, recount Claudia's death to him. And so Claudia's death, which is where I started crying. Famously, I am not someone who, I don't really cry when it comes to film and TV. Now, it's crazy because I'm a Cancer moon and I cry with literally anything else in life. But for whatever reason, film and TV, I don't always cry. Not to say I don't feel bad. I just, the physical act of crying doesn't always happen. But there was something about when Claudia's death scene starts. And Claudia and Madeline are like hugging each other and saying things, I guess, like words of affirmation, words of I love you, words of, you know, we're in this eternally together no matter what. And they open the hatch and they begin to burn. And their screams of terror and pain from Madeline, but from Claudia, she's singing. And she's singing the Baby Lulu song that she hated, that her literally what she felt in that moment of performing Baby Lulu, which was shoving her existence in her face and making fun of it, and that was killing her soul. She sings it again for this audience who have killed her being. They've killed her twice. And her singing it and smiling and then going into these screams of pain and agony as she's burning up while holding the ashes of her slain companion, her newly turned companion. She finally had that piece of joy and happiness for the first time, and then it's gone in an instant. And before she fully goes on, she looks to Lestat. And I think there have been a lot of ways that this has been interpreted. And I think there's a lot of merit to a lot of the different ways. But what Delaney Hales, who plays Claudia, said that in that moment she looks to Lestat as like a parent to help. She looks to him to be like, help me, you know? And it's crazy that she's done it to both of her parents and they've not done anything. Again, the scales of it, very, very different. Very, very different. But Claudia has reached out for help from one of them. She's not always gotten it in the way that she needs it. Not to say she's never gotten it, because Louis has helped her. But in that moment, she looked to Lestat, and Delaney said that she trusts Lestat the most because a lot of the vampiric predator nature about her is of him. And she looks to him in that final moment from daughter to father, seeking help. And he's like arrested in horror looking at her, and then she's gone. And this is where I just kept on crying, because it was just it's so tragic, because at every turn it was preventable. At every turn she could have lived a good long vampiric life with Madeline. Like, had she never come back, she wouldn't have, maybe they would have eventually caught up to them, but maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they would have gone on and lived a long vampiric life and didn't think about any of these men that were ruining their life. And it was just, there have been a lot of gut-wrenching parts of this show, and I think the show does a very good job of taking you there and back again. But this was the one episode where I was like, oh, like it was a punch to the gut, a beautiful punch to the gut. It was just so, again, the layers of everything were just painful to watch, but also so well done. And it is the dichotomy of that is what makes this show very interesting, where it is literally just really difficult things to watch, difficult storylines, difficult revelations, just all in all, just devastation as far as the eye can see. But yeah, we come back for more every single season and every single episode because it's just so beautifully done. And that's kind of where the episode ends. And it was tough. This was a real tough watch. I'm actively trying to keep myself from crying right now. It was a real tough watch because y'all know I love Claudia. And again, like I said, everything about her death was preventable. At any turn, it could have been prevented and she could have been happy. And it didn't happen. And we lost my favorite character. And that really sucks. I put a tweet on Twitter and I was just like, Claudia is a Black Southern woman. She needs a good homegoing service. So I don't know who's doing the program. I don't know who is doing the t-shirts, but we need to go on ahead and get that going. We need to get that arranged. Not everybody can ride in the limo with the family to the funeral home. Arrange your accommodations accordingly. This will be a small ceremony, a small homegoing service for Claudia. Invite only. We will be having light refreshments at the repast. R.I.P. Claudia. Miss you already. I just thought about Claudia singing while she was dying again, and I almost threw up. That's the episode. That is the episode. Like I said, devastatingly beautiful episode. I think it's definitely a top 5, or I'm almost at a loss for words. But yeah, that's it for this week. And the next week is the finale. It's been a crazy ride covering this show, and it feels crazy that we're gonna be at the finale already. I'm excited and scared, and I'm sure the rest of us all are too, especially after how tragic this episode was this week. But yeah, I think the finale is gonna knock our socks off in a way that we're not expecting. I have no theories, I have no predictions. I'm simply going in to be devastated by the tale. Not seduced by the tale, devastated by the tale. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I would love to know your thoughts on everything that happened. If not, we can just all kind of cry about Claudia. If I see any Claudia hate in the comment section, I'm sorry, it's getting deleted. This is not the week. I let y'all run amok all the weeks. This is not the week. Let's be respectful. Okay? Lestat stands. I ain't gonna pick on you, but have some class in the comment section, please. Thanks. But I'd love to hear what you thought about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and do all of that fun stuff. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, you guys, which is incredibly insane and crazy and wild and kooky and nuts. But I really appreciate you all just being here, rocking and rolling with me. I have fun every single week that we do this. Even when the episodes are devastating, I always have a good time. So thank you for doing it with me. As always, I'm Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch. I don't have an outro yet, but I will see you next week for the finale.